All right, so we're diving into a story today that's gotten pretty messy.
Ah,
It's Jay-Z facing a sexual assault accusation, and it all goes back to an incident in 2000.
yeah.
And, you'd think this would be old news. It was a while ago, and the case was actually dismissed.
Right.
But get ready for some wild new developments.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack here.
It is definitely unusual to see a case come back like this, especially since it didn't even lead to charges originally.
Right.
So it really makes you wonder what's going on with both sides, what's motivating them.
Exactly. And just to add to the intrigue, the woman who is making these accusations wants to stay anonymous.
Okay.
So right off the bat, we're kind of wondering, how did this even get started? How reliable are these accusations if she wants to remain anonymous?
Yeah.
So let's lay out what we know from the sources. Our goal here is to try to stay impartial, really break down the twists and turns, the accusations, the lawsuits, the public statements.
Yeah.
So the initial accusation comes from this woman. Again, she's anonymous, and she's claiming that Jay-Z assaulted her at a VMA after party back in 2000. And get this, she was only 13 at the time.
Wow.
And her lawyer is Tony Busby, who you might have heard. He's pretty well known for taking on these really high-profile cases.
Yeah, he's definitely not afraid of the spotlight.
Right, exactly. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because Jay-Z isn't just ignoring this. He's actually filed a defamation lawsuit
Oh, wow.
against both the accuser and Busby.
I mean, it makes sense that he would want to defend himself, but a lawsuit, that's a pretty aggressive move.
Yeah, it is. And you kind of have to wonder, is he trying to control the narrative here? Is he trying to push back so hard against these accusations that, it almost makes them seem less believable?
It definitely seems like he's taking a strong stance, and the fact that he's going after Busby, too, that's interesting.
Right.
It suggests that he thinks there's more to this than just the accuser story.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. Jay-Z is claiming that he's got proof that the woman actually admitted to making the story up.
Possibly even, with the encouragement of her lawyers. So that's a huge claim right there.
It is a big claim, and it really raises the stakes for everyone involved. I mean, if he can't back that up in court, it could really backfire on him.
Exactly.
But if it's true, then it really paints a different picture of this whole situation.
So hold on. We've got this woman claiming she was assaulted, and then we've got Jay-Z saying, no, she actually made the whole thing up, and he's got proof.
Yeah, it's like a complete contradiction of stories, and
Yeah.
it's hard to know what to believe at this point.
Right. And to make things even more complicated, the woman, even though she's staying anonymous,
Right.
she's now saying that Jay-Z's investigators are trying to intimidate her and silence her. She's even saying they went to her parents, like they're putting all this pressure on her.
Well, that's a serious accusation.
It is.
But, it also raises some questions in my mind, like she wants to remain anonymous, but then claims she's being harassed and intimidated.
Yeah.
How does that even work? You know?
If you're really trying to avoid the spotlight, wouldn't you want to avoid any kind of attention even from investigators?
That's a good point. It does seem a little contradictory, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what she's really hoping to achieve here.
Exactly. Is this about getting justice, or is there something else going on? Are there other motivations?
It's really hard to say without knowing more. And it makes me think back to the original interview that the woman's father gave to NBC about this case.
Oh, yeah.
And he said he didn't remember driving her to or from the alleged incident.
That seems like a pretty big detail to forget.
Right. And it makes you think, how reliable are these memories? How reliable are these accounts?
Yeah, you'd think that would be something you'd remember, but memories can be tricky.
Exactly. And then on the other side of things, Jay-Z's legal team has actually asked the court to protect the woman's anonymity.
Oh, wow.
They're citing concerns for her mental well-being.
So the same guy who she claims is trying to silence her is also the one asking to protect her identity.
Right? It's not strange.
It's very unusual, It really makes you wonder about his motives.
Yeah, is he genuinely concerned about her well-being? Or is this just a PR move to make him look better?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's tough to say for sure.
I'm getting whiplash here.
Yeah, me too.
There are so many layers to this, and it seems like everyone has their own agenda.
I think that's often the case in these high-profile legal battles. There's the legal strategy, but there's also this whole other game of trying to shape public perception.
Right, and it's all happening in the public eye, so it adds this extra layer of complexity.
Exactly. And remember that quote from Busby? He said this whole lawsuit is just a desperate attempt by Jay-Z to counter all the negative attention he's been getting.
Right, so Busby's basically saying that this is all about PR. not about finding the truth.
Yeah, that's his interpretation. And, it's not an unreasonable one to make. I mean, if Jay-Z really thought this lawsuit was frivolous and had no merit, wouldn't that just generate even more negative publicity for him?
That's true. So it seems like he's either taking a big risk or he really believes that these accusations are fabricated.
It's a high-stakes gamble for sure, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. All right, so we've laid out the basics here, but there's still a lot more to dig into. We need to look at the bigger picture. What are the potential consequences for both sides, and what does this all mean for the wider conversation about sexual assault?
Yeah, those are the big questions, and we're going to get into all of that right after the break. I mean, we're talking huge consequences here for both sides, right? Like, obviously Jay-Z wants to protect his reputation, and that makes sense. But if these accusations end up being true, then this lawsuit could blow up in his face.
And for the accusers, if she's telling the truth, she's facing a really tough battle. Yeah, it's hard enough to come forward with these kinds of accusations,
right?
Let alone against someone as powerful as Jay-Z.
Absolutely.
But, if it turns out she fabricated the story, like Jay-Z's claiming, then she could be in some serious legal trouble.
Yeah, the stakes are incredibly high for everyone involved. And it's important to keep in mind, we're dealing with unproven accusations here.
Right.
Nothing's been decided in court. So it's really important not to jump to conclusions.
That's easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the court of public opinion moves a lot faster than the actual legal system.
That's true. And this case really highlights that challenge. We've got these two very different stories, and it's tempting to want to pick a side.
Yeah.
To decide who we believe, but without all the facts, without a legal verdict, it's impossible to say for sure what happened.
So what do we do as listeners? We're constantly bombarded with information, accusations, conflicting stories. How do we make sense of it all?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that we all have biases.
Yeah.
We tend to gravitate towards information that confirms what we already believe. And we often make judgments based on incomplete or potentially misleading information.
So we need to be more aware of our own biases and how they might be coloring our perceptions.
Exactly. And we also need to be critical of the information we're getting. Who's presenting it? What are their motivations? What evidence are they using to support their claims?
It's like being a detective.
Yeah.
We have to look for clues, weigh the evidence, and try to put together a story that makes sense.
Right.
But even then, we have to admit that we might never have the full picture.
And that's where humility comes in,
Yeah.
It's okay to say, I don't know what to believe. It's okay to withhold judgment until we have more information. And it's definitely okay to change our minds as new evidence comes to light.
This whole situation, it feels like a puzzle with some pieces missing, We have some clues, some interesting details.
Right.
But we don't have the whole picture. It makes you wonder if we'll ever really know what happened back in 2000.
It's possible that we never get a definitive answer. But even without that, even without a clear resolution, this case brings up some really important questions about power, about accountability, and about the complexities of dealing with accusations in the public eye.
It definitely makes you think about how we as a society handle these situations,
Right.
We want to believe survivors,
Yeah.
but we also want to make sure that everyone gets a fair hearing.
Yeah.
And when you have someone as famous and influential as Jay-Z involved, it's really hard to balance those principles.
You've hit the nail on the head. This case, it's not just about Jay-Z and his accuser. It's a microcosm of a much bigger conversation that we're having as a society.
Okay.
About how we deal with accusations of sexual assault, especially when there are power dynamics involved.
This whole thing really makes you think about our justice system, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's not always about finding out what actually happened, is it?
Right.
It seems like it's more about who can tell the most convincing story. Who can convince the jury or the public.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's definitely a strategic element to it. It's about, legal strategy or persuasive arguments and sometimes even just public perception. And that's what's so unsettling, especially in cases like this where the truth is so hard to figure out.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, the impact that a case like this has on the bigger conversation about sexual assault.
Right.
Like, on the one hand, you could say, this lawsuit is a way to silence accusers.
Yeah.
And discourage other people from coming forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a valid concern and something we need to be very careful about. If people are afraid to come forward because they think they'll be sued or publicly humiliated,
Right.
then that's a huge problem.
But then on the other hand, you could argue that, if we just let potentially false accusations go unchallenged,
Yeah.
that also hurts the movement for justice for survivors,
Yeah.
because then it's like we're saying anyone who's accused is automatically guilty, and that's not fair either.
It's a tough balance. We need to support survivors and encourage them to come forward. But we also need to make sure that the accused have the right to a fair process.
Right.
And that means recognizing that accusations can sometimes be false or misleading.
So where does that leave us? How do we as a society move forward in a way that protects survivors and also upholds the principles of justice?
I think education is key.
Yeah.
We need to be having more open, honest conversations about sexual assault, consent, the complexities of these cases.
Okay.
We need to teach people about their rights, about the legal system, about critical thinking and evidence-based decision-making.
So it's not just about believing everything we hear.
Right. It's about being informed and thinking critically.
And being willing to have those tough conversations even when they're uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about taking sides. It's about recognizing that these are complex issues and there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
And it's about creating a space where we can have those difficult discussions with empathy and respect for everyone involved.
Oh.
This whole situation, it's messy, it's confusing, it's full of uncertainty, but I think that's exactly why we need to talk about it.
I agree. By examining these cases, by wrestling with the complexities and by having these thoughtful discussions,
Yeah.
we can hopefully move towards a more just and informed society.
Well said. This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. We'll be keeping an eye on this case as it develops. But more importantly, we'll continue to explore these crucial conversations about justice, accountability, and our responsibility in navigating a world where, accusations can have such huge consequences. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.